Chapter 16. Rivertown. Adamantis scattered the piles of burning brush aside and cut the ropes binding Katlyn and Talia. Relieved and abashed, Katlyn wrapped her arms around the elk's neck, while Gale chased the last of the Candelee away, the bodies of those who had chosen to fight stretched out upon the forest floor. Gale wiped the blood from her blade using a dead man's scarf, then slammed the sword back into her sheath. "I don't even know if I have the words," she said, glaring at Katlyn through the branches of Adamantis' antlers. "Gale, Adamantis, I'm sorry. It is just, I felt we couldn't wait. I was tired of waiting. I was impatient."
"You were overconfident,"
the elk said. "You were fools," Gale said, kicking a smoking branch aside and yanking one of her arrows out of the dead chief's back. "Had we been moments later, you'd be dead." The irony that Gale, who had essentially killed her once, was now so concerned about her well-being was not lost on Katlyn. Humbled, she dropped to her knees. "I'm so sorry. To you both." Gale let out a loud snort, and then blew the bangs off her forehead and rifled through the supplies the Candelee left behind. She upended satchels and rucksacks, throwing them once empty into the bushes. When she was out of earshot, Adamantis turned to Katlyn.
"She will calm down. In time."
"She's a long way from wanting to enslave or kill me," Katlyn reflected.
"The font may have powers we don't even understand,"
Adamantis said, swinging his head around to Talia to inspect her head to foot. Seeing that no injury seemed to hinder her as she stripped the dead bodies of weapons, rings, and other valuables, he turned back to Katlyn.
"You were going north."
"To Antis. Adamantis, the Vorgs have left the forest. I need to know what happened to my family," she said, tears filming her eyes.
"Indeed. We need to help, but it is safer if we travel together. For now, gather what you can."
Katlyn was a model of obedience, well aware that she had indiscretions to make up for, if not with the elk, certainly with Gale. She helped scavenge what they could from the dead before she mounted her horse and began a long, silent ride. She followed Gale and Adamantis without question or complaint as they pressed north into the evening, long after the violet sky had turned indigo and the stars came out over the mountains in the east. Gale finally stopped when the moon had risen, wrapped herself in furs taken from the Candelee, and said nothing before falling into a deep sleep. Katlyn set to making a fire with Talia. When she had brewed some pine needle tea, she turned to Adamantis. "Should I wake Gale for some tea and supper?"
"Let her rest. She has not slept in days."
Katlyn swallowed a guilty lump in her throat and sat down with a warm cup in her hands. She struggled to find words. Did you find what you were looking for in the south?"
"No," Adamantis said. "It was a false account as far as we could tell. I'm afraid the trail has grown cold. Best we put our efforts into helping the Antons against the Vorgs."
"Katlyn has told me about the creatures. Are you sure the ones in Antis are the same as the ones you encountered in the forest?" Talia asked, while she sliced a potato and dropped the chunks into a pot of boiling water.
"I can envision none other."
Talia shivered despite the warmth of the cooking fire throwing up sparks next to her. They partook of the soup, leaving a bowl close to the fire in case Gale woke up hungry, then followed her example, wrapping themselves in blankets and furs and drifting off to sleep. They woke to the sound of a crow, Soot. The bird alighted on the ground next to Gale's head, which was still enclosed in a hood of blankets, and let out another loud caw. Gale peeked out from her cocoon, bleary-eyed, picked up a rock, and threw it at her faithful pet, along with a mumbled curse. The crow, unperturbed, snapped his wings, and fluttered up to a branch overhead. He was joined promptly by Sapphire, who floated down to land in Adamantus' crown.
"What tidings, little one?"
the elk said, offering a warmer greeting than Gale. The answer came in the form of a horseman, whose mount came pounding up the trail to their camp. At this sound, Gale did rouse herself, picking up her bow and knocking back an arrow so that when the rider rounded the wall of trees and bushes they had nestled their camp behind, he found an arrow already aimed at his neck.
"Well met,"
Darryd said. "My lord." Gale eased back the bowstring. Darryd drew up on the reins of his horse Barnaby as he entered the clearing, ducking beneath the low-hanging moss. When he lifted his eyes and saw Adamantus, he reached for his sword. Gale moved to intervene. "My lord, this creature is our ally. He is not one of the dark elks we seek." Darryd studied the elk with a skeptic's eye.
"This is the beast the prince rode into battle."
"I am," Adamantus said. Darryd's hand went back to the hilt of his sword.
"What sorcery is this?"
"He speaks," Katlyn interjected. "And he is wise, so it is well that you listen, sir." Darryd relaxed his hand from his hilt, reached for the pommel of his saddle instead, and slid out of the stirrups to the ground.
"My eyes have seen wonders, and my ears heard them as well."
He clasped forearms with his squire, a quick and succinct meeting of the flesh between two soldiers, bowed to the others, then asked their leave to sit next to the smoldering fire.
"I've journeyed far to find you."
"Was our path so easy to find?" Gale asked, settling down across from him and offering him a waterskin. Katlyn gathered more kindling, and Talia stoked the embers.
"For me, no, but these birds brought me to you directly. Had I been left to my own devices, I would have searched for you farther east, in Morvant lands."
"We were there," Adamantus said. He offered a summary of their encounter with the Revenant and their fruitless search for the Rachne. Katlyn was grateful that the elk glossed over her own foolish decision to strike out on her own. The elk instead simply offered the explanation that they felt they were needed most urgently back in Antis.
"Were you able to take the moonstone from Owion?"
"Yes," Darryd said, his expression grave. He reached into his hip bag and removed an object wrapped in cloth and twine. He unfolded the cloth to reveal the bright blue of the moonstone, still set in the necklace that Owion had worn.
"The Queen helped me, removing it from him while he slept. He flew into a rage when he found it gone, but almost as quickly he fell ill, growing sick and beset with shaking, not unlike a drunk without his drink. But after a few days he returned to himself, as if waking from a dream. His memories of his time wearing the stone are thin and partial."
"The stones are dangerous. We have the other that was used to control Kairuna, the chief of the Morvant. Our true enemy, the Magus, seems to wield his power over others through them," Gale said.
"Do we know the identity of this Magus?"
"Sadly, not yet. But it is not presumptuous to see his hand working behind the Vorgs as well," Adamantus said.
"We heard rumors from the north of the creatures. The armies of Talamar are eager to return to their home to help, but it is winter, and armies are slow to move. King Owion wants himself again, sent me on the mission that was twofold, to find you and journey to Antis to gather what reconnaissance I could, to bring back to the army. Owion plans to march north come spring. Antis came to our aid in our hour of need. Kerith will repay the debt. We are sister kingdoms, after all, within the realm of Anthor." "Spring may be too late,"
Adamantus said, his voice somber. "Then it is good we have the birds. We can send messages to Kerith that the armies are to leave now," Gale said.
"Let us gather information first," Adamantus said. "From Rivertown at least. That way we can send them back with some tidings of the north."
Katlyn's spirits were buoyed in the coming days. The addition of another warrior to their numbers made her feel safer. The news that Owain had returned to himself and that Kareth would come to their aid was welcome indeed. And the simple fact that each day they made progress towards her home with the intent to help alleviated some of her guilt and her anxiety for her family. They pushed hard into the north, the mountains constant sentinels to their east, the grasslands giving way slowly to the southernmost moors of Thestos. Gale and Dared knew the land well, having marched through with the army only months before. Though Katlyn's outlook had grown rosy in past days, her hopes were dashed when they finally came to Rivertown. A cloud of haze hovered over the town, fed by strings of smoke, rising not only from chimneys, but from open fires burning on the outskirts and from clusters of families camping in the streets. A palisade of pointed logs surrounded the city, sticking out from the riverbanks like misplaced teeth. The bridges leading across the Liam and the Lynn to the strip of land that held the city were blockaded with any able-bodied men to be found, mostly graybeards and older boys, too old or too young to have gone south with the army to fight the season before. Their weapons were antiques, family heirlooms, or makeshift. One boy held a dagger tied to the end of a rake candle, another a modified scythe. The boys remained behind water barrels stacked on the roadway, while an older man, who listed under the weight of his own wood axe on his shoulder, stepped forward to bar their way onto the bridge. He said nothing, although he chewed his lips as if searching for the right words of greeting for such a strange lot as they. Katlyn realized that both parties waited for the other to speak. It was Dared who dismounted and offered his hand to the old man.
Dark days they are, when the bridge to Rivertown is barricaded.
Dark indeed, the man said, his voice a high whisper. Dark indeed, but you are welcome. These barricades are for things not human.
So, what we hear is true, Dared said, of creatures from Sidon.
The old man shook his head and sucked his teeth. I will not speak of them, even in the light of day, lest I summon them. You will hear your fill from those who have fled their homes for the safety of the towns. He stepped aside and let them cross onto the bridge. They walked their horses. To ride would have been impossible anyway. The gutters were full. The reek of people, animals, smoke was eye-watering. It was Kareth all over again, but this time it was worse to Katlyn, for it was the kingdom of her home. Men, women, children, they all wore the same blank expressions of hopelessness and terror. Life had spilled out into every open space. Cooking fires burned in intersections and alleyways. Laundry hung from house galleries. Goats, pigs, chickens jostled against one another in makeshift pens. The line to the well was so long, it stretched around the corner. Voices were subdued. Children did not play. Rather, they gathered close to their mothers or in tight knots, their heads bent low, their gazes fleeting. Their party came to the town square and the chief's residence, but it was surrounded by more refugees and long lines. Some people waited for bread, others for audience with the chief, and others simply waited to be told where to go next.
We won't have much luck breaking through that queue, Dared said. I imagine the constable has his hands full.
I know a place we can go, Katlyn said. Drawing on her memories from their previous visit, Katlyn led them north, through streets equally crowded, to the edge of town, where River Ridge waited. The gates stood open, and the expanse of lawn was occupied by tents, wagons, and dozens of families. There was some relief here, at least, from the oppression and disorder outside. Children stopped their game of tag to gaze curiously at Adamantus. Women and men were busy with chores, seeing to laundry, cooking, or building impromptu tents and animal pens. Katlyn made her way up the main path towards the manor house, and before reaching it, spotted Lorna, her sleeves rolled above the elbow, her head wrapped in a shawl, her front covered with an apron. Lorna was too involved in stirring a cauldron of steaming laundry to notice them approach, but Sorrel, her ever-present apprentice, noticed them and tugged on her mentor's skirt. Lorna's eyes grew wide upon seeing them, and she threw open her arms. "Katlyn, by the stars, come here. These times call for embracing." Katlyn flung herself into the woman's chest, relieved to meet a face that had not changed, even if Rivertown had. "You bring companions? Only one that I know," Lorna said, nodding to the elk, then looking to Darryd, Gale, and Talia. Katlyn offered quick introductions, then said, "It seems too much to ask, my lady, in light of the generosity you already extended to these in your care, but we beseech you for at least temporary shelter, so that—"
"All are welcome," Lorna said with a smile. "Come inside. We have much news to exchange." The creatures came from Sidon, raiding villages and farmsteads alike. The legend said they feared the light of day, but to these monsters it seems to make no difference any longer, Lorna said. They were gathered around the hearth in the kitchen, one of the few rooms of the manor not given over to refugees, presumably so it could still function. Katlyn found the transformation of the formerly empty manor remarkable. Life had returned to its abandoned halls, and Lorna seemed energized by it, her eyes bright. She poured each of them tea, Sorrel following with a pitcher of cream and a pot of honey. "We encountered a horde of many dozen in Sidon," Adamantus said. "Ah, so you have revealed yourself in full Stygorn," Lorna said, not missing a beat at the sound of Adamantus' voice, even if Sorrel looked up startled, the pitcher and honey pot trembling in her hands. The elk lowered his head and blinked slowly in acknowledgement. "The time for secrets has long passed among these friends," he said. "Quite," Lorna said, pulling up a stool and settling down on it, a bucket of green beans between her feet that she began to pick and snap. She was in constant motion, and with the numbers of refugees in her care, Katlyn could see why. She leaned in to help, eager to be of use and anxious to do something with her hands, and noticed that Talia had already beaten her to it, wordlessly finding an understanding with Sorrel, the two of them working in quiet unison. "But the horde numbers in the hundreds now, not dozens," Lorna continued. "I don't believe in coincidences. I'm too old for that. If this Magus is as powerful and has the influence you say he does, I see his hand behind this." "We are assuming that the Magus is behind the Morvaunt invasion and the invasion of the Vorgs, so he tries to sow chaos and discord throughout the realm. But to what end?" Gale asked. "These are weapons wielded with intent. What looks like chaos to us may be a carefully concealed stratagem," Lorna said. "I don't see the Magus endgame." Darryd shook his head. "But this is a foe perhaps beyond us all. And yet in our midst." Lorna's hands grew still and came to rest on her knees. "The King of Entis is dead. The Magus goes through pains to influence the machinations of kingdoms and tribes formerly at peace, while remaining in the shadows. Then the Magus works to remove Prince Hale as a participant in all this." "Does that mean Hale has some part to play in the Magus strategy?" Gale asked, her fingers tightening around her cup. "An interesting presumption, but there is another," Lorna said, her eyes lifting and focused as if on a point far away on the horizon. "Hale might know who the Magus is."